everybody, to the Pink Ribbon Roller Coaster. We're glad you're joining us today. We're so grateful that you guys continue just to show up and hopefully gain some knowledge from this podcast. We have a special guest today. Her name is Michelle Garrett. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she's a dear friend of Project 31. So thank you, Michelle, for joining us today. We're so
Oh,
glad to have you.
yes, absolutely.
So before we get started, today we're going to
Mm,
be coping with anxiety. But before we get into that, Michelle, tell me a little bit about yourself because I know everybody doesn't know you. So tell us a
right.
little bit about yourself and why you became a therapist.
Okay. I've been in the field of counseling. I laugh now, for 31 years, and I realize people can do the math, and so that I'm starting to think, should I keep saying I've been doing this that long? But yes, I've been counseling for 31 years, and so and what drew me into this field was a couple of different things. My mom was always in a caregiving field. She was a nurse. My dad, he got into recovery when I was really young, and so we talked about, a lot of the deep emotional stuff and healing and stuff like that. And then I think I found a real fondness for the Bob Newhart show as a little girl, which will also date me, but he was a psychologist on TV, and I thought that
I
looked
love that show.
interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, those are different things that kind of helped draw me into the field. And so anyway, I've been here in the Oklahoma City area for almost 24 years now. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'm
Married and have 4 kids, and they're all adults now. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, you are an amazing woman and you're a great teacher. And that's why I'm so glad that you've agreed to be with us today. I know in years past, you were definitely involved a lot in leading, speaking at groups and stuff like that. So I felt like this would be a great way to help give some of that knowledge. So let's just start off. As you're going through cancer, obviously, there's so many possibilities of having anxiety through this process, from getting the diagnosis to waiting for the results to, what your treatment plan is going to be. And then once you get to the other side, scan anxiety and that kind of thing. It's very real. So just start off with the basics. I know you have some different things you want to talk to us about today, helping us understand the brain. So you take it from here.
Yeah. And since I was teaching with you guys for a number of years and took a little break, and during that time I got my own cancer diagnosis, and it was thyroid cancer. And yeah, I just remember you hear that word and it just spins in your head,
Mhm.
and all of the possibilities, all of the fears. And so definitely can relate on some level to dealing with at least hearing a diagnosis that's scary. So, yeah, and thankfully things have gone well since. Excuse me. So one of the things that I think about with anxiety, and I tell my clients right off the bat, is to look at it in terms of a scale of 1 to 10. So, what level of anxiety are we living at? So what you find a lot of times is maybe people have had a diagnosis, or they've got health issues, or they've got chronic, just busyness. Maybe they're single parenting, or all of the above, finances. There's all kinds of different stressors that we have. Some, are situational, and then some can be, chronic and ongoing. And so that level of 1 to 10, if we're used to living at, let's say, a 2 or a 3, we've got some margin there when another stressor gets piled on top. But, with the busy lives that so many people live, a lot of times we find that we're actually living around a 5 or a 6. And so that's where I think we can really run the risk of developing more symptoms of anxiety. And anxiety is something that we're not going to be completely free from. It's something that babies we're born with the capability for anxiety. And that's one of the things that helps us learn what to do and not to do, what to touch and not to touch, and how to behave, not behave, those kinds of things. So we're not going to be completely free of it. But anyway, when we start getting accustomed to looking at the scale of 1 to 10, we can start self monitoring. So looking at, what am I feeling emotionally on this scale of 1 to 10? So if 10's a panic attack, and let's say 8, we're really running close to that. What do we need to do then to help bring that down? The other thing people need to look at, is the physiological symptoms that we start to feel. So, and a lot of times, what's interesting is people will not notice their emotions, but we'll notice our physical symptoms. So they'll notice like, tight chest or, fast heart rate. Sometimes people will be afraid they're going to have a, heart attack or
Yeah,
can't breathe, those kinds of symptoms. And so anyway, once we start noticing, then we can start intervening. Um, so yeah.
that's so true because I think a lot of times I'll talk to people and they're not connecting that
Mhm.
it's anxiety. And I think, no, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. But yet they can't breathe. They, maybe my hands will tingle a lot. And
Mhm.
like if I take a deep breath, I feel like my hands have fallen asleep and they're waking back up.
Yes. Yeah.
You said paying attention to your body,
Yeah.
and I think you're right too when you talked about circumstantial, and if you had some underlying potential anxiety prior to something like a traumatic event such as cancer, obviously we need to pay attention. So I think that's probably a really good first step to
Yes.
kind of look at the physiological symptoms to try to
Yeah.
connect that this is anxiety, because a lot of people are like, "No, I don't have that," and you're like, "Wait a minute, yeah, that's what exactly what it is."
Right, and then even just having some compassion for ourselves. I'll tell people sometimes, it's like, pay attention to how you're feeling because those are kinda like the lights on the dashboard of the car. Or, for example, too, if I was to put my hand on a stove and it's hot, I have to pay attention to that, move it,
Mhm.
and it's the same thing with other, emotional and physical symptoms that we have. If we can pay attention and trust that and have some compassion, then we're gonna be more likely to deal with it. But a lot of times what we do is we'll shut it down. We don't wanna talk about those things, and then
Yeah.
it can spiral, so that's where it gets worse. Yeah.
Well, and I think too, in the cancer world specifically, like I was speaking with a lady recently,
Mm,
newly diagnosed, believer,
mm.
very faith filled. And this is where it becomes a little bit of a challenge, I think, as a Christian too, because I feel like we can sometimes put unnecessary pressure on ourselves to respond
Right.
way because we know what the word says. So we have
Yeah.
an expectation of ourselves to respond a certain way, but yet my body's feeling this way and I don't know how to calm it down. And so I'm trying to pray, I'm trying to read my Bible. Sorry, my dogs are barking. Trying to read my Bible, all those things, but yet it's not stopping. And so, um, like I was talking with this lady and I was trying to help her have compassion for herself. Like you just said, like, it's okay. Like this is scary. And
Right.
you are in the middle of that limbo. It's like the hurry up and wait phase. And that is
Yeah.
worst.
Yes.
He was, like, literally a roller coaster, which is why hence the name, Pink Urban Roller Coaster. So, let's talk about that. When you said the scale of 1 to 10, let's just talk about a scenario potentially, like, I'm at, like, almost a 10. What
Mhm.
are the steps that I should take to try to calm that down?
Right. Okay. So, um, first of all, breathing is our best friend. It's the first thing we do when we enter into this world. And so, and when we are in a in like say a panic attack, what's happening physiologically is our heart rate is our brain is already interpreting that as an emergency system. And so um, our heart rate is going up, our breathing is getting shallow, we're not getting as much oxygen, and it throws us into fight or flight, right? And so there was a gentleman out of UCLA, his name's Dan Siegel, and years and years ago, I listened to him explain something he called the hand model. He's a great teacher, and he's really good at making complex things simple. And so, nowadays we're all learning about like the amygdala and the hippocampus and all these things. Um, but what he did was he simplified even that. And so what he talked about was these 3 different parts of the brain. And, I'm gonna give my best shot at this hand model. So down at the bottom of, our brain, there's the brain stem, and this more primitive part of the brain is what he, had called it. And so that, part of the brain goes all the way back to the dinosaur. It's the part of the brain that helps keep us safe and, regulates like our heart rate, our nervous system. There's certain drives like hunger, aggression, different things like that, fight or flight. That part of the brain doesn't think very well. I always joke with kids if I'm working with kids, it's kind of like if you're a T-Rex, you don't problem solve and you don't think well. Um, so, so we don't want to think and make decisions out of that part of the brain. But when we're triggered in a panic attack, we're there. We're also getting the least amount of oxygen in our brain. And so if you think of like the more oxygen I get, the higher the oxygen gets in my brain too. And so the next part of the brain is what they call the limbic system, and more along the lines of emotions and simple problem solving. He had called it way back then the animal part of the brain. And so our dogs and our cats have that, and there's some simple problem solving and things like that. But then the cortex, neocortex, this is something that is you see like in a few primates and a few other animals, mammals, and then also not animals but mammals, and then also in human beings, and that's where you have your most uh, complex problem solving and language and all these different things that where we can access tools to help bring us down even more. So the quickest way to get there is to start practicing deep breathing. And so, one of the things I remember people saying, breathe into a count of 8, breathe out to a count of 8. That was one of the simple ones, right? When I'm nervous, if I'm panicky, 8 is really a stretch. And so I learned a simple one that I really like, which is square breathing. And that's where you breathe into a count of 4, you hold it for a count of 4, you breathe out for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4. And then after you've done that a number of times, then you can lengthen it to count of 5 and then a count of 6. And so we're getting more oxygen and now we can start problem solving. So that hand model and thinking about where we are in the brain, as well as that scale of 1 to 10 are good ways to help us kind of self-monitor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to recap on that.
Mhm,
So when we're thrown into that panic attack situation, our body's in fight or flight. It's
mhm,
because of a lack of oxygen.
mhm,
And so then at that point, we need to bring oxygen to our brain to be able to calm ourselves down and
mhm.
start to think more clearly to be able to problem solve.
Right. Yes. Yes. So mhm,
So if you're, because I've been doing that a lot lately too. Like if I feel a little bit of that tightness coming, I'll just stop and I'll try to breathe, like you said. So it's a really, it has to be like an active practice. We have to be paying
right.
attention to our emotion, like you said. We have to pay attention to our physiological symptom, and then the breathing is our first coping strategy.
Yes. Yeah. Also real quick, so there's different anxiety disorders. There's like generalized anxiety, there's panic disorder, there's certain phobias, things like that. What differentiates just regular anxiety or an anxiety attack from a panic attack is just the number of symptoms present. And so the diagnostic and statistical manual is where you're going to find your best list of symptoms. That's the manual, medical professionals, therapists, all that turn to. And so those symptoms range from, like you mentioned, numbness and tingling in your extremities to, feeling like I'm choking. Some people will find themselves getting real like sweaty. Some will feel like they're going to pass out. There's a whole lot of different symptoms. And so, the higher the amount of symptoms and the more severe the symptoms, the more likely that you might be, experiencing a panic attack. And, that's one of the points where I think it's really, really important to get into a doctor and a counselor because we can turn that ship around pretty easily. Anxiety is super responsive to, both counseling and, medical, uh, interventions too, like medications.
I
Yeah.
know for me personally, like to be honest, was never open to medication prior to walking down this road.
Yeah.
And honestly, like nobody expects to have cancer. Nobody, I mean, it's not like you're taught, you get a handbook, like this is how to handle cancer. And so you're doing the best you can. And then I remember, um, some of the medications from the chemo to the aromatase inhibitors that we have to take can cause anxiety. And you're not necessarily looking at those side effects when you're trying to take medication to save your life. And
Yes.
so it's really researching and understanding the potential for the medication. I say that because I was like, okay, I need to be open to trying something because my doctor, I was just having a hard time afterward, just, the fear of recurrence and things like that. And I didn't know how to move into a new normal. And,
Right.
the doctor was like, Sarah, you know, have some self compassion, like you said, but also there are some tools that we can use. And so let's try this. And honestly, it was life changing
Yeah.
for me, like, I couldn't stop the thoughts. I could not get it to slow down. I and it was just like, uh, torment, like, it torments you. Like, I know a lot of people can't sleep at night, like, it overtakes you. So, how do you know, um, when you should maybe look at that, when you should take it to that level to go see a doctor?
Right. Um, so I would say if you're starting to notice problems in day-to-day functioning, if it's consuming you, to that degree, to where, maybe your sleep is getting disrupted, um, or, sometimes people will stop wanting to get involved in things that they would normally want to. Anything along those lines, I would definitely be starting to consider. If it stays prolonged too.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's another thing. So, and there's so many things that people can do. Um, I think it might be good just to talk about. So I mentioned some of the symptoms, but talk about some of the different things that we can do on top of the deep breathing.
Yeah, for sure.
Call them coping strategies, right? And so, um, in terms of the type of therapy that is, I think, most effectively used with anxiety is cognitive behavioral, and then certain things that kind of branch off of that, like mindfulness and stuff like that, mindfulness meditation. So, with cognitive behavioral, a lot of the things we're looking at is certain behaviors, that so we can work on our sleep. That's always a first line intervention, as far as I'm concerned, is making sure people's sleep is good and healthy, because our anxiety and resiliency and everything is going to be decreased if we're, well, the anxiety won't be decreased, it'll be increased, but if we're not getting enough sleep. But also things like exercise, and some people hate exercise, and it's really cold out here right now. So,
Mhm.
getting outside can be difficult, but anything from going to the gym to, even just doing yoga in your living room, and looking up a YouTube video for that, where you can practice the deep breathing, and that helps tune people into themselves physically, and tune themselves into their breathing. And so there's
Mhm.
a lot of good benefits from that. And then just any other form of physical activity. Walks are great because it gets us outside. And then, certainly increasing our social support, because I don't know if you've experienced this. I think you probably have. And I know the ladies in your group have. Once we start talking and talking to other people, first of all, talking, we're using that language center in the brain, and we're expressing ourselves. And so there's different parts of the brain that are getting used, but, so that gets us up out of being stuck here. But also just hearing that, like, oh, I'm not the only one that feels this way. Others have experienced this, or others have experienced this, and this is what they've done about it, that kind
Mhm.
of.
Sure.
So, increasing social support is another good one. Practicing the deep breathing. And what I usually will tell people is, usually in the beginning of counseling, we're going through all of this stuff. And there's, you can look up online coping strategies for dealing with anxiety. And there's lists and lists of them out there, but keep a journal, or keep it written down, or even in the notes section of your phone, the different coping strategies that work. Uh,
Okay.
because we forget when we're in fight or flight, that part of my brain isn't working. And so I'll have people maybe a month later say, I had some anxiety again, and I need some coping strategies. And so we have to go back through that list and look at, because we do, I think, instinctively a lot of times know some of the things we need to do. So healthy eating, making any lifestyle changes, sometimes learning how to say no a little bit more. Also building in time for fun and resiliency. Um, and I know in some of our times when we didn't, when we had the kids growing up and we're going 90 miles an hour, finding a comedy to watch. We might not have a lot of time to go out and do something fun or that costs money, but even just laughing,
Yeah.
can
Mhm.
kind of help. So, there's a lot of different little things that we can remember. Things that we do when we're feeling good. That should be on that list too. You
That's
know,
good.
what do I
Yeah.
enjoy? Yeah. So,
Well, we talk a lot about that too. Like when you were saying, you're talking about the exercise part. I wanted to
mhm.
also recommend there is a form of yoga called
Mhm.
yoga nidra, which is
Yeah.
more sleep yoga. Because a lot of times, if you're, in treatment or if you've had surgery, you might not necessarily feel capable of moving, but that is something you can do that
Yeah.
doesn't require a lot of movement. But again, it gets back to that mindfulness and the breathing portion, which is very important, like you said.
That's
Um,
such a good point. Yeah.
well, and it's funny, when you said the
Mm.
laughing, we actually, a long time ago, had somebody do laughing therapy.
Mhm.
So I'm sure you can YouTube that and
Yeah.
just, it's important. It's really important to laugh.
Yeah.
Uh, and then when you were talking about doing something fun,
Mhm.
I talk to people about that a lot too. Like when you're in the middle of this, waiting
Mm.
for results, or especially that, like, try to distract yourself, go do something normal, do something that
Right.
you enjoy.
Yeah.
It might just take it a minute where you forget about it, but that's worth it, I feel like, to get your
Mm.
uh,
Yes. Yeah.
what about like puzzles or anything like that where your mind is having to focus on something
Yeah.
else? I that can be a strategy too.
Absolutely. I think anything like that. And, if there's other people, or listening to music at the same time, things like that. I mean, incorporating other people into your puzzle. Although sometimes I've found that making a puzzle with somebody else can be quite difficult because it's like playing a game of Twister where your arms can't. Yeah, and, I was also gonna say, just in terms of nutrition too, limiting things like caffeine and sugar, making sure that you're getting healthy food and that you're eating throughout the day and drinking enough water. Because even things like that, 10% changes in different parts of our life, 10% here, 10% there. All those kinds of things can help, decrease the anxiety and stress in our life. And then just getting outside, going for a drive, just something to get me out of my 4 walls,
Mhm.
can get me out of that stuck place in the brain. 'Cause with anxiety and anger, we can just run like a hamster on a hamster wheel and just stay stuck there. So
Mhm.
anything we can do to get us out of that place. I've heard people
Mhm.
say dancing. I don't know if I feel much like dancing in the middle of a panic attack, but if you
That's
do it. Yeah,
funny.
yeah.
Well, I feel like this is really great to
Mhm.
just have a starting point, and I would love for you to come back and we can continue the conversation. Um, I just want to recap a little bit. We talked about breathing, we talked about mindfulness, we talked about exercise, we talked about nutrition. Again, going through treatment, I know that can be hard, but make sure that the hydration is definitely very important. I really like those liquid IVs, even the sugar free, and to help you, like, because a lot of times you can't get stuff down because they don't feel good, doesn't taste good, that kind of stuff. Protein shakes if you can.
Yeah.
Um, doing what you can, a lot of self compassion, like you said, but trying to keep moving forward. I really appreciate the brain description. That was very helpful to understand too.
Sure, sure.
So, guys, if you guys are enjoying this and this is something that has benefited you, please let us know specifically, maybe some questions or thoughts you may have in regards to anxiety, depression, and we can have Michelle come back, talk to us again. She is a plethora of knowledge and wisdom. And so I just want to say thank you for being here with us today. I appreciate you so much. I love
Yeah.
your heart for people, and your heart for the Lord. And so thank you for being here again, and hopefully we'll have you back soon.
Good. All right. Thank you.